74 years old. Sleeping in a car. Not in a driveway. Not temporarily. Not waiting for someone to come home and unlock the door. Just parked. Alone. In a Walmart lot at 2 in the morning with a blanket that wasn't thick enough and a heater that had stopped working 3 days ago and a silence around her that felt like the whole world had simply moved on without her. This was her life now. Clara May pressed both hands flat against her legs and told herself to breathe. 74 years. She had given 74 years to this world, most of them to other people, to her children, to her home, to a life she had stitched together thread by thread with her own hands. She had stayed up sick with worry over fevers that broke by morning. She had stretched grocery money in ways that shouldn't have been mathematically possible. She had swallowed her own pain so many times it had simply become part of her, quiet, invisible, expected. And this is where it had brought her. This parking lot. This cold. This specific darkness that sits differently when you are old and alone and have absolutely nowhere else to go. How does a woman get here? She had asked herself that question every night for 6 nights. The answer was always the same. Not one moment. Not one decision. Just years of giving everything away until one day you look around and realize there is nothing left with your name on it. Not a room. Not a bed. Not even a door you can close and call your own. She hadn't eaten a real meal since Tuesday. There was a granola bar in the glove compartment. She had been saving it the way you save things when you genuinely don't know when the next one is coming. She didn't touch it tonight. Outside, the parking lot security light flickered. Once. Twice. Then went completely dark. And in that sudden cold darkness, in that silence that pressed against the windows like something with weight, Clara felt it. The specific loneliness of being invisible. Not just alone. Invisible. The kind that comes when the people who should see you simply don't anymore. Her son's voice came back to her. That clean jacket. That parking lot. That word delivered so carefully it almost sounded reasonable. Mama, this is embarrassing for all of us. Not, are you warm? Not, have you eaten? Not, Mama, I am so sorry this happened to you. Embarrassing. Clara closed her eyes. She did not cry. She had moved past crying 3 nights ago. What was left after crying was something quieter and harder and more difficult to name. Then something else came. Older than the pain. Older than the embarrassment. Older than 6 nights of cold and hunger and silence. Her father's voice. Walter Ray, gone 20 years now but somehow always present in exactly the moments she needed him most. She could see him clearly. That backyard on Sycamore Lane. That particular afternoon light that only exists in childhood memories. One hand resting on the old wooden shed he had built himself the summer she turned 12. The shed he had kept locked every single day for the rest of his life. She had asked him once, standing right beside him, maybe 9 years old, squinting up at that padlock, "Daddy, what's in there?" He had looked down at her with that quiet smile. The kind that held more than it showed. "Something that will matter," he said. "Not yet, though. When the time comes, you'll know." She had forgotten that conversation. 20 years. She had completely forgotten it. Until tonight. Until this parking lot stripped everything else away and left only what was real. And what was real was her father's voice and that locked shed and a feeling in her chest she couldn't explain. Was this the time? Was this what he meant all those years ago? Clara May opened her eyes. The parking lot was still dark. Still cold. Still empty. But something had shifted inside her. Quiet. Certain. The way Walter Ray had always been certain about things nobody else understood yet. She sat up straight. Folded her blanket with both hands. Looked at the road ahead. She knew exactly where she was going. And for the first time in 6 nights, she wasn't afraid of what she might find. If something in this story already feels familiar, if you know what it means to give everything and still end up with nothing, stay with Clara. Because what Walter Ray locked away in that shed 20 years ago is going to change everything. Subscribe right now so you don't miss what comes next. The phone lit up at 8 in the morning. That familiar number. The one Clara had been looking at for 6 days without answering, not because she didn't love her daughter, but because she knew exactly what Linda Fay would say before she said it. And she wasn't sure she had the strength to hear it said out loud. She answered anyway. Mama. Just that one word. But the way Linda said it, careful, loaded, already prepared, said everything underneath it. I know where you're sleeping. Ruthie told me. Clara said nothing. You can't keep doing this. We've been talking, Gary and I, and we think the right thing, the responsible thing, is assisted living. There's a place 20 minutes from Gary's house. It's nice, Mama. It's really nice. Assisted living. Clara looked out the windshield at the empty parking lot. The morning light was gray and flat. A crow landed on an abandoned cart nearby, looked at her once, and flew away. Even the crow had somewhere to be. I'll think about it, she said. She hung up before Linda could say anything else. Gary Wayne arrived 2 hours later. He pulled up in that clean SUV, the one he had bought last year, the one he had called her about excitedly like she was supposed to feel something about a car payment, and sat across from her in the passenger seat with his hands on his knees and that expression she recognized. The one that meant he had rehearsed this. Mama. Same word. Different weight. People are seeing you here. Do you understand what that means for? For who, Gary? He stopped. For who exactly? She said again. Quiet. Steady. He looked away first. This is embarrassing, he said finally. Softer now, but still there. Still that word. For all of us. Clara looked at her son, this man she had stayed up through countless nights for, sick with worry every time his temperature climbed, every time the world treated him in ways she couldn't protect him from, and felt something go very still inside her. Not anger. Something quieter than anger. Clarity. Her pastor called before noon. Gently suggested surrender was sometimes wisdom. Her neighbor Ruthie, the one who had told Linda, called to say she had a cousin with a spare room and wasn't that something to consider. Everyone called. Everyone had an answer. Everyone had a plan for Clara May's life that fit neatly and quietly into a box labeled done and finished and be realistic now. Not one of them asked if she was warm. Not one of them asked if she had eaten. Embarrassing for all of us. She sat with that sentence long after Gary's SUV had pulled away. Turned it over the way you turn something sharp in your hands, carefully, looking for the part that draws blood. And then, underneath all of it, her father's voice again. Walter Ray. That backyard. That shed. That quiet smile. When the time comes, you'll know. She knew. Clara started the engine. The Toyota turned over slowly, that familiar reluctant cough it always made in cold mornings, like it needed a moment to remember what it was built for. She understood exactly how it felt. She didn't call Linda back. Didn't text Gary. Didn't explain herself to anyone who had spent the morning explaining her life back to her like she hadn't lived every single day of it herself. She just drove. South on Route 9. Then west on the old county road she hadn't taken in 20 years. Past the water tower she remembered from childhood. Past the diner that used to have the best pie in 3 counties and was now a cell phone repair shop. Toward Millbrook. Toward Sycamore Lane. Toward a locked shed that had been waiting, quietly, patiently, faithfully, for exactly this moment. She just didn't know yet what was going to be waiting inside it. The Toyota had 140,000 miles on it. Clara knew every sound it made, every rattle, every hesitation, every particular complaint it voiced on cold mornings or long highways. She had driven this car through rainstorms and moving days and one memorable December night when Gary had called her crying from a gas station 2 states away and she had simply gotten in and driven toward him without asking questions. That's what mothers do. They drive toward the people they love without asking questions. Even when those same people sit in clean SUVs in parking lots and say words like embarrassing. Even then. Today she was driving toward something different. Not a person. Not an emergency. Something older and quieter and more patient than both. A memory, a promise, a locked door that had been waiting at the back of her mind for 20 years without her even knowing it was still there. She had $23 in her purse. Half a tank of gas. And nowhere else in the world she needed to be. She stopped once, a gas station outside Henderson, the kind that still had a bell above the door and a single attendant who didn't look up from his phone when she walked in. She bought a coffee with coins from the cup holder, stood beside the car in the cold morning air and drank it slowly. Her hands were still shaking slightly. Not from cold. From the parking lot. From Linda's voice. From 6 nights of waking up in a car seat and spending the first 30 seconds of every morning believing, just for those 30 seconds, that none of it was real. That she would open her eyes and be somewhere that was hers. Then reality would settle back in. And she would fold her blanket and start another day. How long can a person live like this? She thought, standing at that gas station with her coin-bought coffee going cold in her hands. How long before it stops feeling temporary and just starts feeling like what your life is? She didn't have an answer. She finished the coffee, got back in the car, and kept driving, because stopping had never been something Clara May knew how to do when something ahead needed reaching. Millbrook's water tower appeared on the horizon just after noon. Clara saw it from a distance. That old green tower with the town's name in white letters faded to almost nothing, and something broke open in her chest without warning. Not sadness exactly. Something older and more complicated than sadness. The specific ache of a place that holds the version of you that existed before life got heavy. Before you became someone's mother and someone's wife and someone's responsibility and slowly, so slowly you didn't notice it happening, stopped being anyone's priority. Including your own. She had been happy here once. Genuinely, simply, completely happy. The way children are happy before they understand that happiness is something the world will eventually ask you to trade for more practical things. She had traded it. Everyone told her that was growing up. Maybe it was. The roads narrowed as she entered town. Familiar corners appeared one by one like old photographs she hadn't looked at in years. The hardware store where Walter Ray bought his tools every Saturday morning, always letting her pick out one small thing for herself while he talked to the man behind the counter about nothing important and everything real. The church with the broken weather vane she had stared at every Sunday as a child, certain that someone would fix it eventually. Nobody ever had. She turned onto Sycamore Lane. Third house on the left. And there it was. Smaller than memory had kept it. Quieter. Paint peeling from the porch in long strips. The front gate hanging at an angle that would have bothered Walter Ray enormously. He had believed in gates that opened and closed properly, said it was a matter of basic self-respect. The yard was overgrown. The flower beds her father had kept with such particular care had disappeared entirely under years of unchecked growth. I should have come back, Clara thought. The guilt of it landed fresh and specific and sharp. I should have come back years ago. Before it got like this. Before he was gone and there was nobody left to come back for. But she hadn't. Life had been busy. Then busier. Then one day her father was gone and the house was empty and the visits she had always been planning somehow became the visits that never happened. That was the thing about time nobody warned you about when you were young. It didn't run out dramatically. It just quietly spent itself while you were looking somewhere else. She sat in the car for a long moment. Engine ticking as it cooled. Hands in her lap. Then she looked up, through the gap between the sidewall and the old oak tree Walter Ray had planted the year she was born. The shed. Still standing. Still closed. That rusted padlock still hanging exactly where her father had placed it the last time his hands had touched it. Clara opened the car door. Got out into the cold Millbrook afternoon. Walked toward the house. Walked toward the version of herself that had been waiting here, patient and quiet and completely faithful, for 20 years. Whatever was in that shed. She was finally ready. The front door opened with a shoulder push. Clara had remembered that about this house, that the front door always needed convincing. Walter Ray had meant to fix it every summer for as long as she could remember and never quite got around to it. Some things about fathers stay exactly the same no matter how many years pass. Inside, dust, silence, time, the particular stillness of a place that has been holding its breath waiting for someone to come back. Her father's reading chair was still in the corner by the window. Same position. Same worn armrests where his hands had rested through decades of evenings. His coffee mug sat on the side table beside it. Faded blue, chipped handle, the one that said "World's Best Dad" that Clara had given him when she was 11 years old and believed that mug was the greatest gift a person could receive. She stood in the doorway and didn't move for a long moment. He was everywhere in this room. Not as a ghost. Not as grief exactly. Just as presence. The specific, irreplaceable presence of a person who had loved you completely and without condition and whose absence leaves a shape in every room they ever occupied. Clara swallowed hard. Then she got to work. No electricity. She used her phone flashlight, holding it in one hand, working with the other, moving through the house the way her father had always taught her to move through problems. One thing at a time, Clara. Just one thing. She found the main water valve outside near the back wall, rusted stiff, the way things get when nobody has touched them in years. She turned it with both hands, arms shaking with the effort, until something deep in the pipes groaned and coughed and water eventually came through brown and then slowly, clear. She swept the kitchen floor with a broom she found behind the door. She wiped the counter down with a cloth she soaked under the tap. Small things. Practical things. The kind of things that give your hands something to do while your mind processes everything it isn't ready to process yet. She ate crackers from her bag for dinner. Drank water from a glass she washed 3 times before using. Sat in her father's reading chair as the light outside went from gray to gold to dark, and felt the house settle around her like something that recognized her. Like it had been waiting for exactly this. At night the old house made its sounds. Pipes. Floorboards. Wind finding the gaps in window frames that had expanded and contracted through too many seasons without maintenance. Clara lay in her father's chair with a blanket from the car pulled over her. She had chosen the chair over the bedroom because the bedroom felt too full of him still, too personal, like entering it without permission, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. Gary Wayne's face kept coming back. That parking lot. That clean jacket. That word. Embarrassing. She turned it over again the way she had been turning it over for days. Looking for the place where it stopped hurting. Looking for the distance that was supposed to come with time. It wasn't there yet. Maybe it never would be. She thought about Linda Fay too. That careful voice on the phone, that word assisted said so gently it was almost possible to miss how final it was. How completely it assumed that Clara May's story was over and all that remained was to manage the ending as comfortably as possible. They had already written her last chapter. Without asking her. Without once considering that she might have something to say about it. Outside, wind moved through the old oak tree Walter Ray had planted the year she was born. She could hear it through the window, that particular sound, leaves against old wood, that she had fallen asleep to as a child without ever knowing she was memorizing it. She was remembering it now. Tomorrow she would go to the shed. Tomorrow she would finally find out what her father had kept locked away for 20 years. What he had believed was important enough to protect, patient enough to wait, meaningful enough to leave behind for a daughter who was only now, at 74, sleeping in his chair and finally ready to receive it. If she was ready. Was she ready? The oak tree moved in the wind outside. And somewhere in the dark backyard, that rusted padlock hanging still and patient on the shed door. Walter Ray's secret kept waiting. One more night. The morning came gray and still. Clara woke in her father's chair before sunrise, back stiff, blanket twisted, the particular discomfort of a body that had spent too many nights in places it wasn't designed to sleep. She sat still for a moment, listened to the house. Then she stood up, put her shoes on, and walked to the back door without making coffee first, without eating. Without doing any of the small preparatory things people do when they are trying to delay something they are simultaneously afraid of and certain about. She walked straight to the shed. The morning air was cold enough to see her breath. Frost on the grass. The old oak tree standing bare against a sky that couldn't decide between gray and white. Her footsteps leaving marks in the cold ground as she crossed the yard, marks that would be gone by afternoon, like she had never been there at all. She stopped in front of the shed door. The padlock hung exactly where it always had. Rusted deep brown now, the kind of rust that takes decades, that only happens when something has been left completely undisturbed for a very long time. Clara picked up a rock from the edge of the yard. Hit the lock once. The sound rang out sharp and cold in the quiet morning. Hit it again. Something shifted. Third time, it gave way with a sound that seemed too loud for everything around it. Metal against metal. Final. Irreversible. She pulled the shed door open slowly. It resisted at first. Swollen wood, stiff hinges, 20 years of staying closed, then gave with a low groan that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the structure itself. And the smell hit her first. Old wood. Something faintly metallic. And underneath everything else, so faint she almost missed it, Old Spice. Her father's aftershave. The same brand every single day of his life for as long as she had known him. Clara stood in the doorway and couldn't move. Inside was not what she expected. Not tools. Not forgotten machinery. Not the accumulated clutter of an old man's life waiting to be sorted through by someone who loved him. Shelves. 3 walls of them. Labeled. Organized. Maintained with a care and deliberateness that immediately told her this had not been accidental. This had been built. Intentionally. Over time. By a man who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly who he was doing it for. Legal folders. Document bundles wrapped carefully in brown paper. A metal box in the corner. Combination lock. 4 digits. Clara stood in front of it for a moment. Then, without thinking, the way you know things that were given to you before you were old enough to know you were receiving them, she turned the dial. 0, 7, 1, 4. His birthday. The lock opened. Inside the metal box, more documents. Older ones. Land survey papers. A deed folded in quarters. Tax records going back to 1987. And on top of everything, one envelope. White. Clean. Completely undisturbed. Her name written across the front in her father's handwriting. Clara May. Not typed. Not formal. Just his hand, that particular way he made his letters, slightly forward-leaning, the C in Clara always a little larger than necessary, writing her name one final time. She picked it up with both hands. Stood completely still. Her hands were not shaking. That surprised her. Through 6 nights in a parking lot and $23 and crackers and Gary's word and Linda's careful voice, her hands had trembled constantly. Like her body expressing what her voice refused to. But right now, holding this envelope, in this shed, surrounded by her father's careful handwriting and his aftershave still faintly present in the cold morning air. Completely still. Like some part of her, the part that had driven 4 hours without telling anyone, the part that had picked up that rock and hit that lock 3 times without hesitating, had always known this moment was coming. She opened the envelope. Unfolded 3 pages of her father's handwriting, and began to read. The first line stopped her completely. My Clara, I have been waiting to write this letter your whole life. I just needed to make sure the right moment had arrived before I sent it. She read it again, then kept reading. And the world she thought she understood, the world that had reduced her to a parking lot and a granola bar she couldn't bring herself to eat, quietly, completely, permanently rearranged itself around her. She read the letter 3 times. Standing in the shed doorway. Cold morning air around her. Frost still on the grass. Her father's handwriting moving in and out of focus because her eyes kept filling in a way she kept refusing to acknowledge. Walter Ray had written 3 pages. Not rushed. Not summarized. 3 full pages in that careful forward-leaning hand. The way he had written everything, grocery lists and birthday cards, and the note he had tucked into her suitcase the day she left for her first job at 22 that she had kept for years before losing it in one of the moves. She had always regretted losing that note. Now she understood he had simply been saving the important one for later. He explained everything. The land, 14 acres on the east side of Millbrook, purchased in 1987 when prices were low, and Walter Ray had saved quietly for years without telling anyone because he had learned early that people treat your plans differently once they know about them. Some things are safer as secrets, he had written. Not because you're hiding them. Because you're protecting them. He had transferred the land into Clara's name in 2003. 1 year before he died. Done carefully, legally, completely. Through a property attorney in Henderson, whose number was written at the bottom of the second page in Walter Ray's handwriting with a note beside it. She's retired now, but her daughter took over. Good people. Honest. And then the line that made Clara stop reading completely for a full minute. I didn't tell you because I knew you would worry about it. You always worried about everything except yourself. I wanted this to just be there, waiting, for the day you needed something that was entirely yours. She folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest, stood in the cold Millbrook morning and breathed. June Hargrove's office was above a pharmacy on Main Street. Clara had found the name in the letter, Walter Ray's careful handwriting, Robert Hargrove's daughter, she handles property law now, and had called from the car outside the house, hands still unsteady from everything the letter had moved through her. The appointment was the same afternoon. Small office. Clean desk. A woman maybe 55 with reading glasses and silver streaks and the particular focused stillness of someone who has spent decades looking at documents that other people find overwhelming and finding them simply interesting. June took the papers Clara slid across the desk. Read them without speaking. Turned pages carefully. Referenced something on her computer. Turned back to the papers. Referenced the computer again. Clara sat across from her and said nothing. She had learned, through 6 nights of cold and hunger and everyone talking at her, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply wait. June looked up. Set her glasses on the desk. Where did you find these? My father's shed, Clara said simply. June looked back at the documents. Your father transferred this land into your name in 2003. Clean title. No liens. No disputes. She paused. Mrs. May, do you know what has happened to land values on the east side of Millbrook in the last 15 years? Clara shook her head slowly. June turned her computer monitor around. A map. Millbrook and surrounding areas. Development marked in colored blocks. A highway extension that had come through in 2015. A distribution center that had broken ground in 2019. Commercial infrastructure spreading east from the town center like something that had been planned for years before anyone mentioned it publicly. Clara's eyes found the east side of Millbrook. Found 14 acres sitting directly adjacent to everything that had changed. This land, June said carefully, choosing every word, was worth very little in 1987. It was worth somewhat more when your father transferred it in 2003. She paused again. It is worth considerably more today. She turned the screen slightly and pointed to a number. Clara looked at it. Looked at it again. The woman who had been living in a Toyota Camry for 6 nights. Who had $23 in her purse and a granola bar she had been saving. Who had been told, gently, carefully, lovingly, that her story was essentially finished and the only remaining question was how to manage the ending. That woman sat in a small office above a Millbrook pharmacy, and looked at a number that changed everything. Mrs. May, June said quietly, I think your father knew exactly what he was doing. Clara looked away from the screen. Out the window. At the street below. At Millbrook going about its ordinary Tuesday afternoon, completely unaware that anything significant was happening 1 floor above it. He always did, she thought. He always knew exactly what he was doing. Gary Wayne called on a Wednesday. Not to ask how she was. Not to ask where she was sleeping, or whether she had eaten, or whether the woman who had raised him through every difficult season of his life was warm enough at night. He called because someone in Millbrook had talked. Small towns always talk. Mama. That voice, the one she had recognized since he was 3 years old, that particular combination of confidence and something underneath confidence that had always needed managing. I heard you're staying at Granddad's house. I am, Clara said. Silence on the line. The kind that means someone is choosing their next words very carefully. We need to talk, he said finally. Linda and I are coming down. Clara looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. At the shed, door still hanging slightly open, padlock gone, 20 years of waiting finally over. Come then, she said simply. Gary arrived first. That clean SUV. That jacket. He stepped out and looked at the house the way people look at things they are already calculating the value of. Not with love, not with memory, just with measurement. He came inside without knocking. Stood in Walter Ray's living room looking at the walls, the furniture, the particular stillness of a place that had belonged to someone who was no longer there to belong to it. This place needs a lot of work, he said. Clara said nothing. Linda Fay arrived an hour later. She brought food, a casserole in a dish covered with foil, the specific gesture of a woman who learned from her mother that food means love and had never quite updated that understanding to account for situations where food wasn't the thing that was needed. She hugged Clara at the door. Long, genuine. And Clara let herself be held for a moment because whatever else was true, Linda had always meant well. That had always been true. They sat in Walter Ray's living room. All three of them. Together for the first time in longer than any of them wanted to calculate honestly. Gary spoke first. Carefully. The rehearsed reasonableness of a man who had decided what outcome he wanted before he arrived. Mama, this property. Granddad's house, whatever land is attached to it, this is family. We should all be part of whatever decision gets made. Together. He said together the way people say it when they mean my way. Clara looked at her son. Then she reached beside her chair and picked up the folder June Hargrove had prepared. Clean. Organized. Every document in order. She set it on the coffee table between them. Your grandfather transferred this land to me alone, she said quietly. In 2003. Legally. Completely. Your names are not on any document in that folder. Gary leaned forward. Opened the folder. His eyes moved across the first page. His expression didn't change immediately. But something behind it did. Linda sat very still. We could contest it, Gary said. Quieter now. Less rehearsed. Granddad wasn't. Toward the end he wasn't always. He was sharp until his last day, Clara said. You know that. You were there. Gary closed the folder. Sat back. The room went quiet in a way that had weight to it. And then Clara said the thing she had been carrying since that parking lot. Since that word. Since 6 nights of cold and hunger while her children lived their warm, comfortable lives and called occasionally to suggest she make herself smaller and more manageable. When I was sleeping in that parking lot, she said. Her voice didn't shake. Didn't rise. Just landed. Clean and final and completely unmovable. 6 nights. Cold. No heat. Not enough food. She looked at Gary first. Then Linda. Neither of you called once to ask if I was warm. Linda's eyes filled immediately. Gary looked at the folder on the table. Nobody spoke. Because there was no answer for that. Not a good one. Not one that held up against 6 nights of cold and a granola bar saved in a glove compartment, and a mother who had stayed up through every fever and every crisis and every 2 in the morning phone call from a gas station 2 states away. There was simply no answer. The silence stretched out long and honest and necessary. Finally Linda said, very quietly, voice breaking on it, Mama, I'm sorry. Clara looked at her daughter. Nodded once. I know you are baby, she said. I know. She looked at Gary. Waited. He looked at the folder. At the table. At somewhere slightly to the left of his mother's face. Then finally, tight, reluctant, real, he nodded too. And that was enough. Not everything. Not healed. Not the conversation that repairs 20 years of gradual forgetting in one afternoon. But enough. For now. The settlement completed on a Thursday. Clara May sat in June Hargrove's office one final time and read every page of every document before she picked up the pen. Not because she didn't trust June. Because Walter Ray had taught her, sitting at that kitchen table on Sycamore Lane when she was maybe 14 years old, that you read everything before you sign anything. The world is full of good people, he had said. Read anyway. She read anyway. Then she signed her name. Clara May. Clean and unhurried. The signature of a woman who knows exactly what she is signing and exactly what it means and exactly how long it took to get to this moment. June watched her set the pen down. "It's done," she said quietly. Clara nodded once. "It's done," she agreed. Let her be honest about what the settlement was. Not a fortune. She would never dress it up into something it wasn't, not to herself, not to anyone who asked. There was no single number that erased 6 nights in a parking lot, or the specific humiliation of Gary's word, or the years of gradual invisibility that had preceded all of it. Life doesn't give you those kinds of clean erasures. What there was, between the land value and the careful work June had done and the clean title Walter Ray had prepared 20 years ago, like a man who understood that preparation is the deepest form of love, was enough. Enough to matter. Enough to breathe. Enough to fix the electricity in her father's house and the water pipes and the front door that still needed a shoulder push to open, which she decided to leave exactly as it was because some things about a place should stay the way the person who built it left them. She chose to stay in Millbrook. That surprised people. Gary had assumed she would sell. Linda had imagined she would move somewhere more comfortable, somewhere newer, somewhere that didn't have peeling paint and an overgrown yard and 20 years of accumulated silence in every room. But Clara knew something they didn't. This house already knew her. She fixed the porch first. New boards where the old ones had rotted. A coat of paint the same color Walter Ray had chosen. She found the original tin in the shed, dried out but still readable on the label. She matched it exactly. She bought a rocking chair. Second hand. Solid wood. Placed it in the spot where the morning light came through the oak tree at a particular angle that made everything feel, not easy exactly, but true. She sat there every morning with her coffee. Watched Millbrook wake up. Listened to the oak tree her father had planted the year she was born move in the early morning wind. And felt, carefully, quietly, without rushing it, like herself again. Not the self that had spent decades making herself smaller. Not the self that had swallowed her own needs so consistently she had forgotten she had them. The earlier self. The one that existed before all of that. The one Walter Ray had always seen clearly even when nobody else did, including her. She went to the shed every evening. Not to look at the documents. Not to review the paperwork or think about the settlement or calculate what had changed in the last weeks. Just to stand in the doorway for a few minutes. To smell the old wood and the faint ghost of Old Spice that was still somehow present if you stood very still and paid attention. To be close to him. One evening she brought the letter. Read it again in the shed's dim light. All 3 pages, slowly, the way you read something you want to actually keep this time. She stopped at the same line she always stopped at. "I knew the world would try to make you small one day, Clara. People do that to women who give too much. They start to believe you have nothing left to offer. I wanted to make sure that when that day came, you would know that your father never believed that. Not for one single day." She folded the letter. Put it back in its envelope. Set it back on the desk exactly where Walter Ray had left it. Because that was where it belonged. Right where he had placed it. By a man who had loved his daughter completely, who had watched her give everything away to everyone else for decades and had quietly, patiently, faithfully built her something she could never give away. Something with her name on it. Something that was entirely and permanently hers. Some things your father gives you while he is still here. And some things he saves. For the exact moment you need to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Don't count a woman out. Not ever. Especially one who drives 4 hours on $23 and crackers toward a locked shed and a father's handwriting and the quiet certainty that some things are worth driving toward even when you can't explain why. She usually knows exactly what she's doing. If this story moved something in you, if you know what it means to be overlooked, underestimated, or told your best days are behind you, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join this family right now. Because the next story we're telling is already waiting, and you don't want to miss it.